Hello, and welcome to Tuesdays at Lunch with Dr. Blum. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. I hope that everybody had a wonderful, family-filled, enjoyable holiday with a lot of gratitude, like we talked about last week, and with all the bumps and ups and downs, and having a lot of family underfoot, or joining somebody else's family if your family wasn't. So just wanted to offer those blessings to all of you as we come out of Thanksgiving, and looking towards what's coming next, which is Christmas and New Year's and those holidays. And of course, maybe later on next week as we get closer, we'll talk about preparing for the holidays. Today, and so again, what I'll do is for the first 15 minutes, and Sarah, you'll tell me when my 15 minutes are up, right? For the first 15 minutes, I'm going to talk, and then we'll do some questions. So this will be our usual format for the Facebook Live. So let's see. I thought that I would talk about the thyroid today. And the reason why, we had put this up on our questionnaire. So a few weeks ago, it was the third thing that everybody wanted me to talk about. But the thyroid is such a big topic and such a big and important topic. Everyone walks into my office and says, there's something wrong with my thyroid. So I'm going to put it into two parts. So today I'm going to talk about sort of the thyroid gland in general, what it is, what it does, and then the things that can cause it to be sluggish. What can happen? Why? In functional medicine, I'm a functional medicine expert, and that's what my clinical practice is very focused on functional medicine, which is identifying the root cause of an imbalance and asking the question, why? Why is your thyroid sluggish? Rather than just throwing medication at you, but sometimes you need medication. But at the same time, it's like doing things in both hands. Like one hand is giving you maybe some supplement, some prescription if you need it. But on the other hand, why is your thyroid sluggish? And if you can figure out why, you can then treat it in a different way that actually fixes the functioning of the thyroid gland completely. And then you don't need medication. So today I'm going to talk about just in general information about the thyroid, what it does, the different hormones, and then what can cause things to go awry. And next week I'll do part 2, which is going to be treating it. How do you treat thyroid dysfunction? What do you do to reverse the process? Because I think I would need more than 15 minutes to get to that, to the treatment piece. So I think we'll save that for next week. And then next week I can also answer any questions that I don't get to today, because I have a feeling this is going to be a very good, a topic that's going to have a lively debate about it. Okay, so let's start. What is the thyroid gland? The thyroid gland sits in your neck. It's sort of a butterfly-shaped organ, and it's part of your endocrine system. Now, the endocrine system is made up of different glands that the glands make hormones. And the definition of a hormone is a compound that's secreted in one part of your body, zips around and has a receptor and lands in another part of your body. So, and it has its effect distantly. So it's made in one place, and it has an effect at distant sites or distant cells and organs in your body. So the thyroid gland, and so what are your endocrine organs? The endocrine organs include your thyroid gland, but they also include your adrenal glands, of which one sits on top of each kidney, and we did talk about adrenals already a few weeks ago. So you have thyroid, adrenal, you have your sex hormones, and your sex hormones for women are your ovaries, or your glands that make the sex hormones are your ovaries, and in men it's your testes, and those are, we all know where those are located, but the other thing about sex hormones is that your adrenal glands can also make sex hormones as well. So the sex hormones can be made actually in two places in the body. And after menopause and andropause, your adrenals actually do make more of those hormones than your ovaries and your testes, which wane as you get older. The other endocrine organ that a lot of people forget about is your pancreas. Your pancreas makes a hormone called insulin. Insulin is actually a hormone because it's secreted from your pancreas and zips around your body, and it binds every cell in your body has an insulin receptor, just like every cell in your body has a thyroid hormone receptor, because the hormones help the cells function. Now, the important thing to remember, especially in the context of talking about your thyroid, is that, and by the way, Sarah, give me a 1-minute notice so I can sort of wrap the,
Sure.
14. The thing to keep in mind is that all the hormones speak to each other. They do not operate by themselves. They do not operate in a vacuum. And so that your thyroid hormones speak to your adrenal hormones, speak to your thyroid, help your thyroid hormones work better. Your sex hormones interact with your thyroid hormone functioning. Insulin absolutely affects the way everything else works. Your thyroid hormone has an effect on how your cortisol works. Everything talks to each other. Therefore, when we're talking about your thyroid, which is certainly the content for today, you can't really address how to have a healthy thyroid without also understanding that you have to have healthy adrenals, and you have to have your sex hormones also working and in balance, and your blood sugar system and insulin working in balance for your whole hormone orchestra to work together. So it's your hormone orchestra, and it's all connected. And therefore, you can't take the thyroid sort of out of that and think that it's only your thyroid when you have a problem. So that's the first thing. The other last piece to the orchestra is that the leader of the endocrine orchestra is the pituitary gland. It's in your brain. So your brain is your central nervous system is in your brain, is your brain, but there's something called your pituitary gland, which is actually a little master endocrine gland that sits in the base of your brain, and it's where all your emotions, thoughts, and feelings and your nerve impulses translate into your endocrine system. And the pituitary releases all of these hormones that tell your organs what to do. So your TSH, which is called your thyroid stimulating hormone, and that is the test that's the most common one your doctor will do to check on the functioning of your thyroid gland. Your TSH is made by your brain. It's the thermostat. It's the brain sends out TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, to tell your thyroid gland to turn on and make hormones. And so the analogy I like to use, and this is going to be important for you to understand your tests when your doctor gives it back to you, is think of your thyroid gland as the heater in the room. The thyroid gland is making the heat. And your brain is the thermostat. And if you know the way that your thermostat works in your house, think of the room in your house, and when it's cold in the room and it drops below the temperature that you want it to be that's set in the thermostat switches on, and your thermostat, you hear the click, your thermostat switches on, and it tells the heater to make heat. So the thermostat says, make heat, the heater goes on, the room gets warm enough, and the thermostat shuts off and says, okay, we're done, no more heat. Well, the thyroid gland actually works that way as well in response to the brain. The brain is the brain says to the thyroid, okay, thyroid gland, make heat, and it sends out TSH. Make the heat, and the TSH is going up to tell the thyroid gland to make heat. The thyroid gland releases its hormones. The main one is T4, and it makes a little T3. It also makes a little T2. There's other T2s in there as well, but that stays in the gland. T4 and T3 get secreted, and the thyroid gland sends those hormones out, raises the heat in your body, and the brain says, okay, we're good, we have enough, and the TSH comes off. And so the TSH is really a reflection of your brain, of the tone of your whole system, right? It's not a thyroid hormone per se. It tells you if your thyroid gland is making enough heat, is making enough thyroid hormone. And thyroid hormones do help with the heat and the metabolism in your body, so it's a good analogy. Now, if your thyroid gland is sluggish, and we're going to talk about reasons why that might be, if the thyroid gland is struggling to make its hormones, what happens? The brain starts yelling louder and louder at the thyroid gland. It's like the thermostat just stays on and keeps revving and revving and revving and sending out more and more signals to the thyroid gland to make its heat. And that's when you see the TSH start creeping up. And so that's the first sign that your thyroid gland isn't working well, because your TSH is going up in number. Now, different people have different cutoffs where they get worried over how high a TSH should be. In functional medicine, we generally like to see the TSH definitely below 2.5. Most of us even below 2. I think ideally you want the TSH in the 1 to 2 range, or below 1 or 0.5 even to 2. is sort of a good range, and that reflects that the thyroid is able to make its hormones, it's listening to the brain, and the whole circuitry is working well. When the TSH is creeping up though, 2.5, 3, 3.5, over 4, you definitely have the thyroid struggling to make hormones. You want to then look at the actual hormones themselves to see whether or not the hormones are at a good level. Because the hormones, your brain might be yelling really loud at your thyroid, but it might still be able to make the hormones. So you want to look at that. And so let's talk about the 2 thyroid hormones. The first thyroid hormone is T4. And what does the 4 stand for? It means that there are 4 iodine molecules. You know, thyroid hormones are made from a thyroid base, think of it a thyroxine base, and then you have iodine added to it. And the iodine molecules, 4 of them are added in to make T4. And then T4 is sent out to the body, and it goes to all the cells of your body, and it drops off an iodine and becomes activated to T3. T3 is much more active in the body than T4. So in some ways, you can think of your thyroid hormones as an iodine delivery system. It's delivering iodine, a very, very important mineral that all your cells and tissues actually need for functioning. It delivers the iodine, drops it off, and then the T3 becomes really active and goes into the cell, to the nucleus, and causes all the effects that you see that we like for thyroid hormones, which include increases your metabolism. That's why everyone wants to have, when they gain weight, thinks it's their thyroid, you know, or realize the importance of the thyroid for that. It does help with body temperature regulation. Thyroid hormones are really important for feeling like I said, temperature regulation, feeling cold. People that feel really cold think that, you know, often it could be from low thyroid function. Could also be low adrenals as well. Thyroid hormones help with the tone of your gut. It helps with preventing constipation, gut motility. Thyroid hormones are important for maintaining your muscle mass and your tissues and your hair. So low thyroid function, people often experience their hair falling out, sort of low metabolic things. And so the thyroid hormones go into the cells and sort of get combustion going, you know, get metabolism going. And we want that. And so we want your thyroid hormone sending out that T4. Now, so that's the first thing we want to know. So is your TSH, how's your TSH? And then even if you have a normal TSH, it's possible that your T4 and your T3 are low. And so you also have to look at both those hormones. And I always do a free T4 test to see how much because thyroid hormones get carried around on a carrier protein in the blood. So you want to check your free T4 and your free T3. Now, one of the main things that we look at in understanding this discussion today is really just about your thyroid gland and how it functions and how to understand the functioning. We really care about your T3. Looking at T4 levels is fine, but what if you have trouble, what we call converting T4 to T3? And making good T3 or having that conversion happen is really, really important. And there's a lot of things that can prevent that from happening. And one of the first things is stress, right? And I've talked about stress a lot. But cortisol, that stress hormone, can interfere with your conversion of T4 to T3 and actually send the T4 into what's called reverse T3. And reverse T3 is like a dead end. It does not do anything good for you. 2 minutes left, oh boy. So you want to make sure that you're converting your T4 to T3 really well. So stress is a big factor, but there are other things that help you convert T4 to T3. Things like good, iron levels, and progesterone's involved there, right? Good, like progesterone levels, not too much, and you need some progesterone to help that conversion. Zinc, selenium, some of this is where the minerals come in. So you want to make sure that you're converting T4 to T3. And so these are the things we look at, which is why your vitamin status and your other hormones in your orchestra are really important to look at as to why you might be sluggish with your thyroid hormones. So if you have low T4 or you have low T3, it could be because that you're having some interference from deficiencies in these nutrients that you need, as well as interference from other hormones. The other nutrients, and just circling back for a second as we sort of talk about what can cause the thyroid to not function well, is nutrients that your thyroid needs just to make the T4. And the number one most common cause of hypothyroidism in this country is iodine deficiency, and it has been always. Now, I will say that Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune condition, is creeping up as probably fast becoming the second most leading cause of hypothyroidism. But traditionally, for the past 30 years, iodine deficiency has always been the #1 cause. And people that have what's called a goiter, which means your thyroid becomes a little enlarged, what happens is the thyroid gland, if it doesn't have the nutrients it needs, or if it's inflamed for any reason, the cells can multiply and the thyroid gland overgrows and becomes bigger. And that's called a goiter. And that's the first sign that something's not right. Your thyroid gland is working extra hard and the cells are dividing and growing to try to help make more thyroid hormone. And so you can tell that your thyroid's struggling if the thyroid gland has become enlarged. So we want to make sure you have enough iodine in the diet. And we're going to talk about that next week, all the ways to treat these things. So you want to make sure you have iodine. You want to make sure that you have enough zinc and selenium. Selenium helps support the enzyme glutathione transferase, which is really, really important in keeping your antioxidant system active in your thyroid gland to protect it. So you need enough selenium and you need enough zinc. And those are the minerals that are really, really important for thyroid function. The other big cause of hypothyroidism, which we'll talk about in part 2, is autoimmune disease and other things like toxins and toxins that can go in the thyroid gland. Your thyroid gland is the canary in the coal mine. And we call it that because anything you're exposed to ends up there first. So things like pesticides with chloride residues end up in the thyroid gland. Mercury gets taken up into the thyroid gland, and those things can actually trigger autoimmunity. But at the same time, they can also just cause dysfunction and inflammation in the gland, which causes you not to make thyroid hormones well. So, summing up sort of what we spoke about how the thyroid works, right? TSH, T4, T3. The nutrients that you need to make your hormones and to make the conversion of T4 to T3, which is the active form of the hormone. And the other thing that can cause, so not having those nutrients can cause hypothyroidism. And the other big causes of hypothyroidism, which is autoimmunity and toxicity. And I actually have to throw in also celiac disease and gluten, because there's a whole condition that there's an association between Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism and celiac and gluten sensitivity. So, and we'll talk more about that next week too, I think, unless anyone has a question about that, I could talk more about that. So I can keep going unless there are any questions. Let's see. Okay, so let's see. Are there any relationship between a struggling thyroid and female fertility? Oh, that's a really great question. Well, there is you do have to think about it as your endocrine orchestra. And so if your thyroid's not functioning, well, two things come to mind. You have to try to understand why you're hypothyroid, because some of the causes of hypothyroidism might cross over to the causes of infertility. For example, autoimmunity. If you have one autoimmune condition like Hashimoto's, you're increased likelihood of having another autoimmune condition. If you discover that you're celiac or you have severe gluten sensitivity, that can also trigger inflammatory, endometriosis, as well as inflammatory, inflammation in the body in general, which can interfere with fertility. But also, there's autoimmune conditions, trigger other autoimmune conditions that are associated with infertility as well, like antiphospholipid syndrome and issues with clotting. And so yes, you want to just look into why you have a problem with your thyroid, because that might give you an indication as to what's going on with the fertility issues. So what happens during menopause? Okay, what happens during menopause for the thyroid gland, I wouldn't say that, well, here's the thing about menopause. You have two things going on. You actually have multiple things going on. Your ovaries are starting to poop out. So you're starting to have less estrogen and progesterone. And what happens is the body shifts its reliance onto the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands become really, really important in making all your hormones. So the adrenal glands sort of take center stage and take over for the functioning of your ovaries. What that does is it puts more stress on the other endocrine organs, right, in order to keep everything working and keep everything in balance. And so you can find that your thyroid gland gets a little thrown off during menopause. And And that's because the adrenals can sometimes get thrown off and you don't have the cortisol or the stressors. Because the other thing that's happening in menopause, as when you hit menopause, is it's a time of life when things are, I find in speaking to all the women I speak to, and this has been my personal experience, it's a time of life when if you have children, everything's converging. If you're a working mom or not, your kids are all in high school or going to college, and you've been at it for many, many, many years and often not taking very good care of yourself. You stop sleeping so well. There's a whole interference with sleep that happens and the menopause symptoms. And it can cause a lot of stress hormones to be released and the stress system. And the stress system really interferes with your thyroid hormones. It interferes with your conversion of T4 to T3. So you definitely can see a change in your thyroid function after menopause, and it's mostly, I think, mediated through the changes in your adrenal glands that we see after menopause. So there's that question. What about if the thyroid gland has been removed due to cancer? Can there still be issues converting T4 to T3 after years of being on hormone replacement? And the answer is absolutely yes. The conversion of T4 to T3 it happens in your cells. It actually happens in all the tissues of your body. So it has nothing to do with your thyroid gland. If you've had your thyroid gland removed and you're only taking Synthroid or Levoxyl or any kind of T4 replacement, we don't have any idea about how you're converting T4 to T3 unless you check your free T3 levels. So you actually really need to go and check your free T3 levels to make sure you're converting well. And the conversion of T4 to T3 for me is a really good sign of how well your body's doing, how well your stress system's doing, how good your whole orchestra is doing. Because T4 to T3 is so sensitive to inflammation, it's sensitive to the stress system. And if you have a lot of inflammation in your body, you have a lot of high cortisol levels, you're going to have impaired conversion of T4 to T3. So when I do the first tests and I see somebody with really good T3 levels, I think to myself, okay, the balance in the body is pretty good. So it's a really good way for you to sort of check in and see, the overall tone of your endocrine system and just inflammatory system, and to see, how you're doing. If you find that you're free T3, and to give you some numbers, I think 2.6 is my cutoff for a good free T3. If you're like 2.5 or below, you've got a low free T3 and we have to work on it. I would say 2.6 is sort of borderline. I like to see it at least, I very rarely see anyone over 3, unless they're taking a T3 supplement, which you can do, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But if your free T3 is 2.8, 2.9, 3.0, and you're not taking any separate T3 in your supplements or in your prescription, then good for you. It's a very good sign that the system is working well. You can take glandular supplements that have T3 in them as a way to support the system if you're not doing well, converting. And actually, there's something called low T3 syndrome, or Wilson's low thyroid, and there's all sorts of names for it. I do think of it as like a low T3 syndrome, and sometimes everything else looks good. The TSH looks good, the free T4 looks good, but the T3 is really low. And I've had people where it's 2.2, 2.3. You can't possibly feel well with a free T3 of 2.2. And unless your doctor is testing that, you're going to miss a whole group of people who have low thyroid function, of hypothyroidism, from sort of low T3. And you really need to work to increase it. So I often give, zinc, selenium, vitamin A, things like that to help people do conversion and to help convert. And we'll talk more about that next week in terms of helping to convert T4 to T3. But I work on that. But sometimes I use glandulars, and I give people things like Nature Thyroid or Armor Thyroid, which has both T4 and T3 in it, to support that system as well. Okay. So I don't get to sleep. I take Euthrox meds for underactive thyroid. What can help to get some sleep? Okay. And I see you're of our older, an older woman, and that's fine. She said the woman who asked that question is 72. So sleep, it's such a great question, because sleep is actually almost like the little black box of our whole hormone system, right? Sleep is a player, but it's not thought of as its own, as it's not often thought about. Sleep is the time when we restore and we feel better and we get, that's when our body recovers. But not sleeping can disrupt everything, because not sleeping affects your cortisol levels. And people who have really interrupted sleep will often wake up with really high cortisol levels in the morning, or you're not sleeping because your cortisol levels are high. And so cortisol really interferes with your conversion of T4 to T3. It also just interferes. Cortisol actually blocks the effect of thyroid hormone on the cell surface itself. So stress, even though your hormone levels, this is like another thing to even throw in, a wrench to throw into the whole thing, is that if you have high cortisol levels, your blood test might look perfect, but you're not feeling the effects of your thyroid hormone isn't working at the cell level because cortisol is blocking it. And so helping you sleep is so, so important. There's a catch-22 here. It's a vicious cycle. High cortisol can prevent you from sleeping, and then when you don't sleep, it raises your cortisol. So there's a chicken egg thing. Like, what comes first? Is it because your cortisol's high, or is it because you're not sleeping? So people with insomnia or difficulty sleeping, I often send them off for an adrenal saliva test. It's a functional medicine kit that you can get from any kind of naturopath or functional medicine doc or integrative doctor. You can even ask, Quest and LabCorp actually have cortisol saliva that you can get, sticks from them. You can ask your doctor to test your cortisol. You can ask them to order cortisol saliva test, and you can get that done from Quest or LabCorp, but you really want to do 4 measurements during the day and look at the whole curve. You want to see what it is in the morning when you wake up and before you go to bed. And if you have high cortisol at night, that could be why you're not sleeping. And then we can take things, and we can talk about that next week in terms of treatment, what you can do to lower cortisol to sleep at night. If you have high cortisol at night, melatonin often works really well, and yes, at 72 you can definitely take melatonin. So although I always say check with your own doctor before starting anything new, but cortisol interferes with sleep, and it'll interfere with the thyroid, so that is really important. All right, so we have 2 minutes left. Let's see, any other questions? I think I answered everything that everybody has for me. So I'll give you just sort of one, let's see, is there anything else about the thyroid that I haven't mentioned? I do want to say one last thing about how to, there you are. Sorry, that was my son in college that called me. He just called me by phone. So I didn't see you all for a second. So actually, I'm not going to say anything else because I was going to start talking about treatment, and I really want to save that for next week because that's a huge whole discussion. So that wraps up today. So today was part 1, all information about the thyroid gland. This is going to help you understand our conversation next week. And next week, I'm going to talk about treatment. We're going to talk about how to treat, how to get iodine, how to test yourself and figure out if you have too many toxins that might be in your thyroid gland, how to address Hashimoto's and Graves' disease, Graves is a hyper-functioning thyroid gland, which we didn't talk about, but it's an autoimmune disease. So how to talk about autoimmunity in the context of the thyroid. So that's it for today. We got a lot in. I hope you all appreciate it. You can leave questions for me that I'll answer next week. And have a great week. And next week when I see everybody, it'll be December, which I sort of can't believe, but yep, we're here. And it's almost the holidays, but we'll do thyroid next week, and then after that we can start talking about the holidays. So have a good week, and I will see you all next week.